The Batman is maybe a month old as I record this, and I basically spoil the whole stinking thing. Consider this a warning. I think the degree to which I'm being forward about my feelings on Joker in the title of this video might turn some people off, and that is precisely the intention. I could frame this as a measured and jury-driven comparison of Joker and the Batman, but that's just not what this is. I think Joker is just pretty terrible, and I want to give that heads up so you're free to walk away if that's not what you want to hear. I get it. When I feel alone on an opinion, I tend to assume I am the drama, and I think that's at least pretty true here, but this might be my own unpopular opinion that baffles me the most. I was genuinely confused the first time I watched Joker as to what the appeal was. As a film on its own 2 feet, it's hypertextual and glib and feels like a first draft.
I killed those guys because they were awful. Everybody is awful these days. It's enough to make anyone crazy.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel! That makes me feel angry!
But I find it just as unpalatable as an adaptation, a viewpoint I was finally able to set to music thanks to Matt Reeves' The Batman, which covers many similar themes to Joker, but with a respect for the characters involved and finesse of storytelling I really expected from Joker and just didn't find. When it comes to dark Gotham adaptations, the Batman's similar themes to Joker speak volumes about where Batman reimaginings are headed, and I'm thankful the Batman is such a step in the right direction in a postmodern Batman subgenre that's become harshly critical of Bruce Wayne. It's the 21st century, and we've been exposed to the fact that millionaires aren't actually a good thing. Batman is a fantasy of a man with immense resources who uses those resources to fight crime and defend the defenseless, and as cynical as I sound, I love Batman to this day. His corner of DC is home to some of its most fascinating stories and phenomenal villains. But one would be burying their head in the dirt not to acknowledge how poorly some of the core tenets of the character have aged. Considering people in real life have amassed similar fortunes to Bruce Wayne, and we've seen they have no interest in behooving mankind, and mostly in hindering it. So it's become harder and harder to root for Batman, when a once whimsical wish that corporate bigwigs will save us with their power gradually comes to resemble downright propaganda.
Wayne Tech promised an electric car by this year. Where's my goddamn electric car, Bruce?
Modern adapters of Batman acknowledge this and seem to have a mission to mitigate the matter by making the most miserable superhero ever even more miserable, creating narratives where Batman's privilege is explicitly called out. A class conflict in Gotham is what both Joker and the Batman's Riddler are almost entirely motivated by, both villains looking to punch up in the name of Gotham's unwashed masses, and that of course includes the family Wayne, but not necessarily Batman directly. Now, if we adapt Batman in a way that removes his privilege, he really wouldn't be Batman anymore. After all, where then would he attain bat-shaped cars and planes and Little Caesar's calzones? So the alternative is to make sure this privilege is something he suffers for. But if we too deeply ingrain privilege in Bruce's character, one runs the risk of making him less likable. So to make absolutely clear that the movie about the billionaire is still tastefully anti-billionaire, Joker and the Batman both establish some hidden past evil on part of Bruce's father, Thomas Wayne. Both movies establish that Thomas was involved in some classist no-nos, which play a part in creating the figures of the Joker and the Riddler in response. And this is a huge thing Reeves' version of Bruce has to confront, and something Joker's version of Bruce doesn't, because he's a child in this movie, which is pretty lame. I really don't understand the use of heavily tying the Wayne family into the Joker's backstory when Bruce himself isn't even aware enough to connect the dots. And Joker's commentary on privilege has a very convenient escape plan that way, since Bruce is too young to take any accountability for his or his father's position as socialites. This essentially makes Joker's rhetoric a one-sided argument, and we can still paint a character as ripe for interpretation as Thomas Wayne and make him a twirly-mustached debutante bad guy to dissuade that this isn't the case. Arthur Fleck, on his road to become the Joker, endures the loss of his minimum wage job and social counsel when the funds to his therapy are cut, and the declining health of his mother, who tells Arthur that Thomas Wayne is his father to unclear degrees of truth, which results in Arthur hating Thomas and the upper class, which is a ton of purpose to give a character who was always meant to embody meaningless chaos. You mean to tell me Joker had a scheme involving trademarking the laughing fish to get Batman's goat because he thinks we should hashtag eat the rich? I've never once felt he cares about social causes in that depth, and you could argue I'm applying one adaptation of the Joker to expectations of another, but as an adaptation of the Joker by name, he's expected to live up to basic tenets of the character. Otherwise, the movie should just have some other name. It's abundantly clear, no matter what version of Joker you're observing, that he does not apply a rhyme or reason to his actions. It's not about revenge or even riches, and his background has always been just as blurred and enigmatic. A common trope of the Joker in multiple versions is the fact that he's constantly fabricating new backstories for himself to spin people and manipulate them into his hands, to show just how little purpose his actions have and how much he prides himself on that sense of chaos, which is why having a whole movie where Joker's motivations are divulged to great length via talk show so drastically misses the point of the character. That being, he has no point. He's a living embodiment of the cynical Murphy's Law nature that begot Bruce becoming an orphan, who in turn devoted his life to saving anyone by being just as omnipresent and goalless as a force of good. That's why Batman and Joker are such incredible foils. Neither has a massive endgame in sight or a point of accomplishment in the horizon. They just want to spread respective good and evil with whatever existence they may have. I can see how class conflict got attached to that rivalry between Batman and Joker in a postmodern sense, but it does away with all that rich character scaffolding and symbolism, the way Joker seems to reduce the matter to rich people bad. The way the Waynes are written in Joker feels so pointed and hateful, I can only imagine playing off of the recent rejection of Batman's wealth by the consumers of the character. The recently popular notion he's just some rich guy punching the mentally ill. When the observers of Batman became weary of the element of his wealth, they equally so began to view his rogues gallery as the victims of the matter. Unwell people who Bruce hits in the face to take his temper out and relieve his own trauma, and yeah, there's truth to that, but it's grossly oversimplifying the matter when it comes to roughly 9 out of 10 Batman villains. Yes, therapy would probably benefit the ventriloquist instead of a hit in the face, and maybe we should hear out Poison Ivy. But guys, come on. No matter how colorful or idiosyncratic, most of Batman's enemies are organized criminals. You really think Batman stopping someone as illustrious and exploitive as the Penguin is him punching down? You think such an array of Alice in Wonderland themed weapons and machinery just grows on trees? When it comes to the contingent of Batman enemies who are organized criminals, which is really most of them, they're definitely unwell, but they have a swath of resources they're misusing. Sound familiar? This is how Batman's villains relate to him. They're all just as sick as Batman, using absurd resources for their means in response to their trauma, just as Batman does. But while Clayface, Mad Hatter, and Two-Face were all men in positions of reverence and privilege who let a trauma turn them into criminals, Batman's trauma turned him into a hero. That is the edge of the cliff he straddles and must constantly resist plunging into. It is often said that the appeal of Superman isn't the fear that he may lose to his adversary, but the question of if he will continue to do the right thing despite his immense power, and the same is true for Batman, who could use his riches and ingenuity to become just like the despots he surrounds himself with, but he slays that inner demon every day. He's just as sick as his rogues, but his narrative is one of self-account for that, and in this way, he's his own toughest foe. Again, the argument for Batman abusing his power against those below him is there. But to insist he's this perfectly well guy just bullying the disadvantaged is what I take issue with. Many of his rogues are just as powerful as he is, and he's just as damaged as they are. Batman has to stow away the version of himself that misinformed superhero fans idealize and sometimes realize in works like Joker, thinking this is his modus operandi, because that aspect is present and rears its ugly head from time to time. and Batman's principle to fend his nature away is an invaluable nuance of the character. Batman refuses to kill because he knows he and Joker are similar. They're both ideals with no identity outside of what they pursue, only defined by the limits they live by, which is why I'm frankly kinda baffled Joker seems intent on making Batman and Joker as different as possible, simply establishing that one is born of privilege and one of poverty, and because class conflict is eternal, they are destined to do battle. This culminates in the part of Joker I find most excruciating, and most thoroughly demonstrates how badly it misunderstands these characters, where Joker incites a massive insurrection on live TV at the hands of Gotham's oppressed lower classes, one of whom shoots Thomas Wayne while parroting the Joker's incensing phrase, directly connecting the Joker and his hardships to the death of Bruce Wayne's parents and the birth of Batman. Okay, the whole point is that Thomas and Martha Wayne died for no reason. It happened for no reason. Not because someone was inspired by the Joker to go out of his way to shoot him, accompanied by portentous words. The death of Thomas and Martha, just like both Batman and Joker's mentality, is caused by nothing and begets nothing, only the spirit of good and evil. This Joker is not an agent of chaos. He's an agent of very particular ideals and very particular intention, and it fucking sucks! And maybe this could kind of fly if Bruce could somehow represent the Joker's mentality and still draw a parallel, however changed from his comic book roots that may be. But there's nothing interesting to glean from that because Bruce in this movie is a kid. Bruce has so little autonomy in this film that there can be absolutely nothing to draw from his conflict with Joker besides rich versus poor. This movie asks some daunting question of Batman's privilege and Joker's validity, but has immense cowardice in how it doesn't even lend Bruce a mouthpiece or significant dialogue to represent anything. Joker tries to paint Arthur as sympathetic, if not ultimately correct, but when his chief opponent Strawman is a literal toddler, of course he's gonna look like he has a point. Which just shines a light on the fact that the mentality of the character of Joker in this adaptation is so pathetic that it would never have a leg to stand on if its opposition weren't a malicious cardboard cutout of a one-percenter or a literal child. Let's switch gears to the Batman's version of Bruce, who is at the very least old enough to actually reckon with the tough reality of his father's actions, even if pinning so much on Thomas is still pretty dumb to me. As intuitive as this arrangement of the sins of Thomas Wayne sounds, if you ask me, this is just a less than discreet leaning over the classroom desk to copy off the homework of the shakingly successful Tony Stark. Iron Man's story is one of a man who used his ingenuity and privilege to do more harm than good, learn a lesson, and turn over a new leaf and use his distinctions to fight for heroism. And that's a great story, and Iron Man rules, but Iron Man isn't Batman, and Batman isn't Iron Man. Batman is Batman, and he's already pretty impacted by life-changing tragedy. I'm not clutching my pearls that the good name of Thomas Wayne is tarnished by these new adaptations, but it strikes me as kind of an easy solution to answer for Bruce's privilege, by attaching sins to him that aren't even his. And as much as I made this video to praise the Batman, I didn't like this instance in that particular movie either. I have some big and complicated thoughts on the MCU, but I never once felt like Tony Stark was being relieved of his accountability for years of war profiteering. Whereas having a filthy rich superhero whose only social commentary comes at the expense of his dead plot device father just feels incurious. Despite this, the Batman sticks the landing in that it's still critical of Bruce, but more of his justice than just his social standing. The Batman makes little secret of the fact that there are heavy parallels between Riddler and Batman. Both are vigilantes taking the law into their hands to force penance onto those they deem deserving. It's just that Riddler is a murderer aiming at white-collar crime, and Batman's adversaries are usually more outwardly harmful thugs and crime lords, who he deals with non-lethally. Besides that one distinction, they're both loners and outcasts, isolated by their drive for justice. This is the Batman-Bat-Villain dynamic, someone Batman can be haunted by the image of in his own mirror, not something as childishly simple as the poor guy hates the rich guy because of course he does. Batman has to endure hearing one of the Riddler's followers parrot his catchphrase, "I am vengeance," and take a hard look within himself to determine if he really is better than these terrorists. And Bruce's answer to that query comes in the form of the heart-swelling sequence where he devotes himself not to hurting anyone any longer, but to saving civilians one by one. He learns that the punitive harm he's been doling out is not always the answer, as the Riddler single-handedly demonstrates, which makes this gorgeous shot, dyed red by Bruce's own rescue flare, so phenomenal. It's the moment where Bruce stops being a vehicle of mere vengeance and becomes one of heroism, a statement I'm comfortable making considering how early in Bruce's career of vigilantism this sequence occurs. This is the shift from vengeance to justice. It's here we're reminded no matter how similar Batman is to his enemies, be it for privilege or for vengeance, at his core, he's a hero, and that is what sets him apart. And as little of Bruce we see in Joker, can you fathom a universe with the mentality that movie carries ever showing something so poignant or admirable from Batman? Joker is such a fundamentally unchallenging movie that would rather sweep the rug out that Batman sucks than actually provoke thought as to why that is or how he could redeem himself the way Matt Reeves' Batman does, beautifully. Reeves also has a case as to how and why Batman kinda sucks, but it challenges that idea and gives Batman himself a chance to topple the notion, and he does so with flying colors. We live in an era of film addressing its own criticism, and rather than allowing a love for the character in question to bestow an even brighter moment that allows Batman to bounce back, movies like Joker seem comfortable in indulging bad faith trip-ups in a manner that just strikes me as craven and submissive, siding with the popular contrarian view of a character as an easy exit strategy, which is why my favorite thing about Matt Reeves' take is how he addresses these blind spots while trumping all of them by demonstrating what makes an actual hero. And I think he's well earned the good faith and franchise talk this achievement of superhero film has created.